Please join me and Halcyon in a responsive reading. I'll read one part alone, and I ask you to read the other parts with Halcyon. The words will appear at the bottom of your screen. Connections are made slowly. Sometimes they grow underground.
You cannot tell always by looking what is happening.
More than half a tree is spread out in the soil under your feet.
Penetrate quietly as the earthworm that blows no trumpet.
Fight persistently as the creeper that brings down the tree.
Spread like the squash plant that overruns the garden.
Gnaw in the dark and use the sun to make sugar.
Weave real connections, create real nodes, build real houses.
Live a life you can endure. Make love that is loving.
Keep tangling and interweaving and taking more in. A thicket and bramble wilderness to the outside, but to us interconnected with rabbit runs and burrows and lairs.
Live as if you like yourself, and it may happen.
Reach out. Keep reaching out. Keep bringing in.
This is how we are going to live for a long time. Not always.
For every gardener knows that after the digging, after the planting, after the long season of tending and growth, the harvest comes.
Church life in the United States has changed dramatically over the last 400 years. From the early days of the established state church and a requirement that all residents involve themselves in worship and congregational life, to a time when more people describe themselves as non-religious, without any affiliation whatsoever. Churches of all denominations and beliefs have survived massive change. They've lived through stinky times and changed with new each challenge. Churches in early America weren't intended to be warm, cozy spaces. They were intended to be rather unwelcoming.
The Puritans that settled in the area we now call New England believed that suffering was a natural consequence of original sin, and that it was the human lot in life to suffer happily. Suffering was elevated to virtue, so congregants sat on hard, cold benches in unadorned white spaces, listening to sermons in which their faults and shortcomings were named.
It was expected that every member of the community would contribute to the financial well-being of the church through taxes. And after disestablishment of the church as an agency of the state was final in 1833, every member of the community was expected to tithe.
And the church didn't just expect them to give money. The church expected every member of the family, from the youngest to the oldest, to be present every single Sunday. So church pews were sold, essentially rented to families. The seating was arranged in tight rows and aisles with doors in each section. Often those doors were labeled with numbers, or even a family name. These pew boxes were comforts provided for a fee, sometimes complete with their own heating sources, but mainly they were a way of keeping tabs on attendance.
These meeting halls weren't sanctuaries for rest and rejuvenation. In fact, quite the opposite.
They were hot during the summer and cold during the winter. It was a rare church indeed. If they had the means, families would bring to church with them their own heat source, in the form of foot stoves filled with glowing embers from their fireplaces at home.
That practice went back centuries in Europe.
Catholic churches during the medieval period were towering spaces made of stone with enormous, beautiful, but drafty stained glass windows, testament to the power of God and the power of the church. Priests would ritualistically burn incense, waving gold censers, filling the place with thick, choking billows of smoke.
Parishioners in the medieval period brought their own odors to the sanctuary.
You have to remember that after the middle of the 14th century, when about half of Europe's population died of what was then called the Black Death, people were afraid of bathing. They believed that the contaminated water would make you sick, not only by drinking it, but by bathing in it. They believed water would open up their pores and let infection in, so they just wiped themselves with dry cloths.
Hair was also cleaned without shampoo.
Everyone, women, men, and children alike, would thoroughly comb their hair twice a day with a very fine tooth comb to remove dried oils and dead skin cells. Some people were more thorough than others, and when they weren't thorough, or if they neglected the task altogether, they weren't welcome pew neighbors in church.
In the 19th century, change came to the more liberal churches in America. The Universalist church began allowing women to be ordained, but was loath to give them the power of ministering to their own congregations. Jenkin Lloyd Jones, who was considered a radical religious modernist, the founder of All Souls Unitarian Church in Chicago, and the corresponding secretary of the Western Unitarian Conference, began hiring these women to found churches in the West. Women like Mary A. Safford, Eleanor E. Gordon, and Caroline Bartlett Crane built churches in dusty western towns like Sioux City, Iowa, Kalamazoo, Michigan, and Minneapolis, Minnesota. They called themselves the Iowa Sisterhood and were so challenging to the practices of the times, historian Cynthia Grant Tucker dubbed them the Prophetic Sisterhood.
In describing their practice of ministry, they spoke of themselves as mothers of congregations who were making good homes for their families by using not only their sympathies, but also their mental powers, business acumen, and understanding of world affairs beyond the kitchen and nursery. Cynthia Grant Tucker.
These women ministers brought with them the energy of committed homemakers, but they built new congregations with a dramatically different attitude from their male colleagues.
The influence of the two most exalted vocations, that of the mother and the minister, combined in one personality, ought immeasurably to spiritualize and exalt the nature of her children. Reverend Francis Willard.
The churches they built from the ground up in these dusty western towns, in concert with the people of their congregations, looked unlike previous churches. They had the feeling of comfortable homes in which life was centered around the fireplace and where all were welcome. Their influence spread across the nation as they moved into more and more powerful pulpits in more established cities. Eventually, their congregations were so vibrant and successful, they were coveted by the men educated in prestigious Eastern seminaries. And those men replaced them, claiming ministry was becoming too feminized and was losing its social gravitas. George Badger, who took over Eleanor Gordon's last pastorate in Orlando, Florida, crowed in his letters to Samuel Eliot, president of the American Unitarian Association, that he kept Gordon in check at the Southern Conference.
Our female colleagues no longer have any real clout. She seemed to be making a comeback with an impassioned speech on future mission work with herself as master. This had long been her pet dream, but fortunately, I moved in to snatch it out of her hands as deftly and graciously as possible. George Badger.
The Iowa sisterhood may have faded away by the end of the first decade of the 20th century, but their influence lingered in the form of the fellowship movement. With financial assistance from the American Unitarian Association, new congregations were planted all over North America by lay people who had learned that religious community is more than a minister and more than just a building. Lay-led fellowships rented community spaces for their Sunday services and gathered outdoors at public parks. Committee meetings were held in the living rooms of members' homes and around fire pits at campgrounds. For a while, it served them to not be yoked to expensive facilities. But the sheer numbers of their children, baby boomers born after World War II, created new demands. Many congregations started buying large old houses to serve as their needs. One such congregation is East Shore Unitarian Universalist Church in Northeast Ohio. In 1960, they bought a 35-year-old mansion, abutting land where a new freeway was soon to be built.
It always felt like, came out of a story, out of a children's book. It kind of seemed like a magical place.
Former homes may have had a familiar yet enchanting quality to them, but they weren't without their problems.
It was probably about 2.5 or 3. One of the first times we went, I got lonely in childcare, missing my dad, and I went down to the sanctuary. And I remember kind of timidly going into the room, and at first people didn't see me, and then someone noticed and said, "Who's that kid?" and who did she go with?
Keeping children separate from the adults, often in dark basements or airy attic levels, was just the beginning of the issues.
East Shore's attempt to convert a 1920s reproduction of an English Tudor manor house known as Greystone to a church was definitely problematic, especially for a group with limited financial resources. Maintenance was costly and often necessary. Installing an air conditioning system would have been out of our reach, and you didn't dare open the windows on the I-90 side of the building because of the noise. Crowding was often a problem, especially for Sunday services and whole church functions. It was always hard to get from one place to another during coffee hour, though in some ways I liked the close physical contact. Bill Butler.
As congregations grew, and the responsibilities of ministry were too great for small groups of lay leaders, fellowships began calling settled ministers and calling themselves churches. While they looked nothing like the churches of their early American predecessors, they had a similar problem: smoke in their space.
I actually was board chair in the early 90s.
Across the nation, smoking was being banned indoors for the protection of employees and the guests of public spaces.
So the idea came up, maybe we should not allow smoking in the building. It could be dangerous. However, there was a church member who was a volunteer who was a very avid smoker. And she often worked in the office, spent many long hours in the office, helping with committee work and other things. And she complained about this idea of banning smoking She loved smoking while she worked for the church. So it was very tense. People were really worried about her, and she was obviously feeling very hurt that we were going to do this change in policy. And we had her come to the board and speak to the board, and we tried to be as sympathetic as we could. But in the end, we decided that the welfare of the community had to trump the welfare of an interest of one person. And interestingly, just after we made that policy, we were talking to her husband, or maybe it was during the time we were formulating the policy, and we asked him, we said, well, you know, how do you deal with the smoking in your house? And he said, well, I don't let my wife smoke in the house. She has to smoke outside. So after that, we felt a little better about changing the policy.
Having settled the problem of secondhand smoke, congregations were seeing a new spike in growth as the post-war baby boomers were having children of their own. They started thinking more expansively and veered toward more permanent, purpose-built facilities of the institutions that were growing as resources to the wider community. Churches began feeling the need for larger, more flexible spaces that could accommodate a variety of needs, from Sunday morning services to parties, social gatherings, and community events like art shows and women's fairs. Lay people made huge sacrifices, contributing to capital campaigns and donating their labor to the construction of new buildings that looked nothing like traditional churches. These larger, brighter, more institutional spaces served a multitude of purposes.
Got some amazing spaces. For example, our classrooms are bright and sunny with lots of windows, and they're great for either meetings or classes, as well as just hanging out and playing games or lounging on the couch with friends. Also, our sanctuary, the ability to move the chairs around, and means that we can do things like have a dance party, or big craft projects, or get together in small groups for conversations. And it just helps tremendously with helping the youth to feel like they're a part of church life. We want the kids to feel like they're just as important as the adults, and they're full-fledged members of the church, just like the adults. And the flexibility in our facilities really allows that to happen.
One of the great advantages of flexible space was the ability to arrange seats so that participants in worship could see each other instead of just having to face forward. And at the center of the worship space for many congregations was the ritual of sharing joys and cares.
We also did lighting of the candles. And everybody who wanted to would get up and form lines. And there would be two long lighters. I don't know what they're called. And people would come and light their candle and then pass it on to the next person so they could light the candle. So it was a very symbolic way of sending up prayers. And I really enjoyed it.
In the last few years, congregations are challenged by cultural shifts outside of their control. Attendance and membership are down as fewer families attach themselves to any church. And worship is forced to compete for time with Sunday activities like sports. And folks are dying, including many who joined as early as the 1950s and 1960s, the days before professional ministry or even dedicated church buildings.
Whenever we would lose a church member, it was like losing part of our family. In 2018, we lost so many members, including my husband. When I attended his service there at East Shore, I felt surrounded by love.
Paying a fee to donate a chair became a form of stewardship, to remember those who have gone while taking care of the facilities by paying for rug and upholstery cleaning. The air became fresher and the space less crowded. But something else was causing discomfort.
Nothing ever. Oh, one time something happened. I can't remember exactly what it was, but somebody had to get up and blow candles out. It happened, and somebody stepped up and took care of it, or somebody's, and so it was dealt with. But it, it's a warning call. It's a warning signal that, hey, lighting candles isn't always the best thing to do.
Concerns were expressed to the worship team that some were struggling to breathe. They, along with lay leaders invested in maintaining a meaningful Joys and Cares ritual at the center of the sanctuary, joined to think creatively about a new ritual, which was explained during worship.
And so it changed. And what changed was that instead of candles, we have this beautiful vessel made out of wood that is just gorgeous. And there are stones in it, and there's a basket of stones at the entrance of the sanctuary, and folks are asked to take a stone. And it's the same symbolicness as the candles, lighting the candles, except a stone is placed into the vessel. So the symbolism is there, but it's not the same. And there was conversation in worship services that this was something that was being thought about and being dealt with. It was strange at first, but I think now it has the same value to those that participate as lighting the candles.
Then a year ago, the pandemic hit.
From that moment on, everything changed.
Well, there's certainly a lot of information out there, a lot of it misinformation. And it's our job as legislators to wade through all of that and listen to the experts and make the best decisions for the people of Ohio. If there's one thing we all agree on, it's that something must be done. And whatever that something is, it involves the vaccine, the state budget, restrictions and freedoms, families, small businesses, churches. All the things we care about the most. The people we care about the most.
The chief concern of the Board of Trustees once again was the health and safety of the congregation, as they acknowledge that every individual has a responsibility to protect the most vulnerable among us, even with no known end date. The decision was made to move all services and meetings to online platforms.
Dick's absence became even more obvious to me, and I was really struggling. I am so grateful to East Shore because they quickly adapted to online services and Zoom meetings, and those have kept me going.
After a few months, the board, at the request of many congregants craving human contact, even if only from 6 feet apart, decided to allow outdoor gatherings. But that only lasted until autumn, when infections from COVID-19 began to rise again. By the end of the winter, everyone, including public officials, were ready for it all to be over.
I'm tired of Zoom.
and Facebook and YouTube. I'm tired of texting happy birthday. I'm tired of the masks messing with the beard.
The good news is that at East Shore, as with every other Unitarian Universalist congregation, members and friends are taking care of each other in every way they can, even if it isn't perfect.
Well, I probably do the same thing everybody else does as far as maintaining relationships now, because there's a lot of email, phone calls, and Zoom, and it works as well as can be expected. I don't feel disconnected, but I feel less connected. And of course, like everybody else, I'm looking forward to actually being in person with family and friends. It just seems like that's never going to happen, but hopefully it will. And I'd like to be able to go out to eat.
Yeah, me too.
We will be together again, even if we don't know when that will be. Even though pews are empty and gatherings are virtual, relationships are still vibrant. People share gathering in Zoom meetings, having meals together, each in their own home, and taking part in worship on Facebook and YouTube.
I'm optimistic that we'll see each other again. Really see each other soon. We'll see each other. Mask on. At a safe distance. In the pews. This summer. Well, chairs. You know what I mean.
Seeing each other, really seeing each other, may be the most miraculous and possible outcome of this epidemic. But it requires more than just eking through it alone.
Go into any new situation with an open mind and an open heart. If I go in expecting that something is going to be healed or taken care of, that's when I'm disappointed, because I'm expecting a miracle to happen. And that's so unrealistic, because those are who put the service together. How are they going to know what my need is? So it's a miracle I'm expecting. And then I was always disappointed. So it's like, don't expect a miracle, but if it happens, rejoice and you know, grab hold of it and take it and go with it. So.
Throughout history, communities of faith have lived through stinky times. They've weathered the storms of unforeseen challenges and faced conflicts head on, always to come out stronger in the end. Church life in early America counted on the support of members who simultaneously felt a sense of ownership of their congregations and a fear that not participating and paying their fair share would lead to eternal damnation. As our theology has become more liberal and hell has disappeared from our lexicon, fixed pews arranged in a cruciform pattern have made way for movable chairs, flexible space, and varied programming. The air has become free of smoke and odors, but the air is more dangerous than ever from the threat of contagious pathogens. But the church is still important to the people who remain. Stewardship has continued across the generations, with each a renewed sense of purpose and commitment. Stewardship just looks different for each generation, and generations to come will face their own challenges and make their own changes in response. Change can be scary, but we always get through it. And there's so much to look forward to, knowing that our combined efforts will get us through whatever stinky times come our way. just as they always have.
Stewardship Committee Chair and Vice Chair of the Board of Trustees for East Shore Unitarian Universalist Church in Kirtland, Ohio. I'm here to interrupt your regularly scheduled program. That statement is mainly tongue-in-cheek, but just like public television, each year we kick off a pledge campaign to ask for financial support so that we can plan for the future. Our future includes continuing to provide a spiritual home for people dedicated to love, revere, discover, and connect. Planning and delivering outreach to our community and the world for social justice, environmental issues, and equality. We will continue to support each other and our church community, to keep our beacon shining and provide a physical place of homecoming, eventually. And this year to hire a new minister. All this takes resources. People willing to support our spiritual home with our time, money, attention, and skills. It's been an unprecedented year for all of us, for the entire world. A global pandemic, massive unemployment, racial unrest, isolation, death, political schisms, and mismanagement of all the above. This congregation has risen to the challenge. Individually and as a church, we are facing a new landscape. The leadership and staff of East Shore Unitarian Universalist Church have continued the avocation and the business of caring for the church and each other, just as each of us has done in our own lives and within this spiritual community. Much of our lives and our communication has had to, out of necessity, become virtual. What a learning curve for us all. So I, as stewardship chair in our committee, which is comprised of Barbara Phillips, Jerry Green, and Pam Leiniger, will be interrupting your regular lives for the next little while, asking you what you are able to do in these challenging times to pledge to support your church, and to recognize and uplift people for all the gifts they pledge to this congregation, only some of which are financial. The financial need for fiscal year 2021 to 2022 is great this year, as we outlined in the pledge packet which was sent out last week. So please give as you are able. Everyone who returns their pledge by April 3rd will be entered in a raffle for 2 $100 Visa gift cards as a thank you for an early response.
I am always amazed when I think back on all the sacrifices people have made to make this congregation the vibrant community that it is. Those who have gone before us and you all have given your time, treasure, and talent to ensure that we not only have facilities we can be proud of, but also an extended family where everyone feels cared for and loved. So this morning, with incredible humility, I ask you to send in a check in fulfillment of last year's pledge, even as Mary and everyone on the stewardship committee ask you to consider your pledge for the coming year. If you're new to East Shore, even if you've never experienced a gathering under our beloved beacon, please consider giving what you can to show your appreciation and your sympathy with our mission to love, revere, discover, and connect. The words of Judith Meyer. This is what we do with our faith. Live in this world, knowing that we will lose each other. Loving despite the hard bargain it demands of us. Doing what we can so that truth may be safely lived. Measuring our faith by the difference we have made. Building up faith communities to continue after we are gone.
We are now recording.
We join hands
In Unitarian Universalist Fellowship,
pledging ourselves to an individual religious freedom
which transcends all creeds.
Not to think alike,
but to journey together. Yay!